Before the red coat of the British soldier became a common sight, a different flag flew over the St. Lawrence River. This was the banner of France, the symbol of a sprawling, ambitious, and uniquely North American empire called New France. It began as a whisper, a dream in the minds of explorers like Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain. They saw not just a wilderness of endless trees and rushing rivers, but the potential for a new French society. This was a land of opportunity, a place to build forts, to trade for valuable furs, and to spread the Catholic faith among the indigenous peoples. It was a bold vision, stretching from the cold shores of Acadia down the mighty St. Lawrence and all the way to the humid bayous of Louisiana. This was not a colony of crowded cities, at least not in the way the British colonies to the south were. New France was a river empire, its lifeblood flowing along the St. Lawrence. The society was built around the seigneurial system, a semi-feudal structure where habitants or farmers worked long, narrow strips of land that stretched back from the river. This gave everyone access to the main highway of the colony. Life was tough, dictated by the harsh seasons of planting and harvesting, of freezing winters and brief hot summers, yet it forged a resilient and distinct people. The Canadians, with their own dialect, their own customs, and a deep, unshakable connection to the soil and the river that sustained them. The heart of New France beat in its three main towns, Quebec, Montreal, and Trois-Rivières. Quebec, perched atop a great cliff overlooking the river, was the administrative and religious capital, a fortress that seemed unconquerable. Montreal, further upriver, was the boisterous heart of the fur trade, a meeting place for rough-hewn coureurs des bois, indigenous traders, merchants, and soldiers. These towns were small by European standards, but they were the command centers of a vast network. From here, priests, explorers, and traders pushed ever deeper into the continent's interior, following the rivers and lakes, establishing alliances and claiming immense territories for the French crown. This French dream was intertwined with the First Nations. Unlike the British, who often sought to displace indigenous populations for agriculture, the French relied on them. Alliances, particularly with the Huron-Wendat and Algonquin peoples, were essential for survival and for the fur trade. The coureurs des bois and voyageurs learned to live in the wilderness, adopting indigenous technologies like the canoe and snowshoe. Intermarriage was common, creating the Métis people, a new culture born from the union of two worlds. This complex relationship of trade, alliance, and conflict was a defining feature of New France, making it fundamentally different from its English-speaking neighbors. Why did this sparsely populated, snow-covered colony matter so much? Its importance was not in numbers, but in strategy resources. New France was the key to controlling the interior of North America. The French held the two most important river systems on the continent, the St. Lawrence Great Lakes system, the Mississippi River. This gave them a stranglehold on the fur trade, the economic engine of the era. Beaver pelts from the Canadian wilderness were in high demand in Europe, used to make fashionable felt hats. Control of the fur trade meant control of immense wealth and influence, a prize worth fighting for against their great rivals, the British. Furthermore, New France acted as a massive strategic barrier. It effectively pinned the 13 British colonies to the Atlantic coast. Look at a map from 1750, and you see a thin strip of British settlement hemmed in by a vast French arc. This arc ran from Louisbourg on the Atlantic through the St. Lawrence Valley and down the Ohio Valley and the Mississippi Valley. The French built a chain of forts, like Fort Duquesne, where Pittsburgh now stands, to enforce their claims and to block British expansion westward. For the British colonists, who were rapidly growing in population and hungry for new land, New France was a constant threat and an infuriating obstacle to their westward ambitions. The colony was also a statement of imperial power for France. In the 18th century, global prestige was measured in territory and colonial possessions. To have a foothold in North America was to be a major player on the world stage. New France was a projection of French military power, economic power, cultural power. The fortress of Quebec was not just a colonial capital. It was a symbol of French resolve, a bastion meant to secure the continent for the Bourbon kings. Losing it would be a devastating blow to national pride and a major victory for the British, tipping the global balance of power. Finally, the very existence of New France was a source of constant friction. The clash was not just between empires, but between two different ways of life. The British colonies were agrarian Protestant and relatively self-governed by local assemblies. New France was Catholic royalist and ruled directly from Paris through a governor and an intendant. These fundamental differences in religion, government, and economic priorities made conflict almost inevitable. The borderlands, especially the Ohio Valley, became a tinderbox where French soldiers, Canadian militia, their indigenous allies, British regulars, and American colonists clashed repeatedly in a struggle for dominance. The importance of New France was defined by the conflict it generated. The simmering tensions between France and Britain finally boiled over into a global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. In North America, this was the French and Indian War. It began with a skirmish in the Ohio Valley in 1754 involving a young Virginia officer, George Washington. This small spark lit a continental fire. The British decided the only way to secure their colonies was to eliminate the French presence. It was a plan of total conquest, an ambition never seen before in North America. The British strategy was audacious and multi-pronged. They would not just nibble at the edges of New France, they would strike at its heart. The plan, masterminded by William Pitt, involved a massive commitment of troops and, crucially, the power of the Royal Navy. The Navy would blockade French ports, preventing reinforcements and supplies, slowly starving the colony. At the same time, massive armies would advance from multiple directions. One would capture the forts in the Ohio Valley, another would push north from New York toward Montreal. The main thrust would be an amphibious assault up the St. Lawrence River to capture Quebec City. For the people of New France, the war brought years of hardship and dread. With the British Navy controlling the seas, supplies from France dwindled. Inflation soared, food shortages became common. Every able-bodied man was expected to serve in the militia, leaving farms and families to be tended by women, children, the elderly. They fought alongside French regular soldiers and their indigenous allies, waging a desperate defense. They were skilled in guerrilla warfare, using the forest to ambush and harass the larger British armies. Yet they were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. By 1758, the tide was turning in Britain's favor. The massive fortress of Louisbourg, guarding the entrance to the St. Lawrence, fell after a lengthy siege. This catastrophic blow opened the door to Quebec. In the west, Fort Duquesne was abandoned and burned by the retreating French, and the British established Fort Pitt. The great arc of French power was crumbling. The final act was set for summer 1759. A huge British fleet carrying an army of 9,000 professional soldiers navigated the treacherous waters of the St. Lawrence and laid siege to the capital of New France, the fortress on the rock, Quebec. The summer of 1759 was a season of fire and fear for Quebec. The British Army landed under the command of James Wolfe, young, intense, brilliant. They landed on Ile d'Orléans, just downstream from the city. From there, his artillery relentlessly bombarded Quebec, turning many of its stone buildings into rubble. The city sat high on its cliff, seeming impossible to take by direct assault. The French, led by Montcalm, equally capable aristocratic, were dug in along the Beauport shore, a long line of defenses stretching east of the city. For weeks, Wolfe probed for a weakness, launching a costly and unsuccessful attack at Montmorency Falls, feeling the pressure of the approaching winter. Wolfe was a man possessed, driven by ambition, plagued by illness. He knew time was running out. He grew more desperate. He devised a plan of incredible risk. He would move his army by boat past the city at night, land at a small, lightly defended cove called Anse-au-Foulon, and have his soldiers scale the steep cliffs to the plateau above. The plateau, the Plains of Abraham, was the weak spot in Quebec's defenses, a stretch of open farmland just west of the city walls. The plan was so audacious that many of his own officers thought it was madness. On the night of September 12, 1759, under the cover of darkness, the plan was put into motion. In near total silence, British boats slipped past the French sentries on the river. The first soldiers to land at the cove scrambled up the muddy path.